You dare refuse me? That house should belong to the Hayes family, not some stubborn girl who married in. Victoria's words sliced through the room moments before her hand rose and landed across Imani's face. The sound echoed through the dining room, turning celebration into shock. Imani held her cheek, not because of the pain, but because of the betrayal standing beside her. Daniel did nothing, but what came next would change the entire balance of power. In just a few minutes, the woman they tried to break would reveal the truth they never expected and reclaim the home she built with her own strength. If this story moves you, remember to like, subscribe, and comment the country or city you're watching from. Imani Walker stood in the entryway of the house she had worked years to claim as her own. The late afternoon light filtered through the windows and washed the hardwood floors in a warm glow. She always paused in this spot before beginning her evening routine, as if grounding herself in the quiet promise the house represented. Every board and wall carried proof of her determination. After a childhood marked by evictions and broken leases, she had decided early in life that she would one day build a place no one could force her to leave. She had found this small home with peeling paint and faded shutters, a place most buyers ignored. Where others saw a burden, she saw a chance to create stability. She sanded the walls, fixed the cabinet doors, and painted each room until they reflected the calm she longed for. The house became more than shelter. It was a reflection of who she had fought to become. Steady, prepared, and unwilling to let the chaos of the past repeat itself. When she married Daniel Hayes 2 years earlier, she welcomed him into this space with a cautious hope that surprised her. Daniel had seemed genuinely proud of the life she had built. He admired her discipline and often told her that her dedication inspired him. He never questioned why the deed bore only her name. He said he understood that her connection to the house ran deeper than anything he had grown up with. His family, the Hayes family, had always lived comfortably. They never knew what it meant to cling to a place in order to feel safe. At first, Daniel's acceptance eased the worry that lived in a small corner of her mind. She believed they were creating a life grounded in respect. Yet the first sign of a shift appeared the day his mother, Victoria Hayes, came to visit. Victoria carried herself with the confidence of someone who expected rooms to adjust for her presence. Her eyes scanned the living room with the precision of a person taking inventory. She touched the back of the sofa, glanced at the photographs on the mantel, and nodded as though deciding whether the home met a standard only she understood. Victoria smiled at Imani, although the smile did not soften her face. She said in an amused tone that the Hayes family finally had another property to be proud of. The comment struck Imani like a cold draft. Daniel chuckled awkwardly and brushed it aside. Yet the words settled into Imani's thoughts. Something about the way Victoria said our home created a subtle discomfort that Imani could not ignore. Over the next few months, the discomfort grew. Victoria often visited without notice, bringing pastries or flowers that felt more like offerings to mark territory than genuine kindness. She asked pointed questions about renovations Imani planned, and she routinely addressed Daniel as though he were the rightful decision-maker in the house. Each time she said "this home of ours," Imani felt the invisible line she had drawn begin to blur. She wondered whether Daniel noticed the shift, but each time she raised the subject, he brushed it off with an affectionate kiss and insisted his mother meant well. One evening, Daniel arrived home later than usual. Imani was preparing dinner and immediately sensed tension in the way he placed his briefcase near the door. He approached her with a warm smile that did not reach his eyes. She leaned into his embrace, waiting for him to relax, but he held her with an unusual hesitation. "I talked to my parents today," he said while watching her stir the pot on the stove. "They think it might be time for us to think about the future in a more practical way." Imani set down the spoon and looked at him. "What kind of practical way?" Daniel cleared his throat and tried to sound casual. "They suggested that maybe we should add my name to the deed. Not because they want anything from you. They just think it would show that we are truly building a life together. It would make us more secure, legally and financially." The knot forming in her stomach tightened. She recognized every one of those phrases. They were clothed as reassurances but carried a weight she had learned to mistrust. Her mind replayed the many visits from Victoria, the proud tone she used when claiming a sense of ownership over the home. Imani kept her voice steady. "This house has always been mine. It is not about being unfair. It is about holding on to the one thing I built when I had nothing. Daniel reached for her hands and offered a gentle smile. I get that, truly, but my parents believe that marriage means sharing everything. Maybe they are right. Imani heard the shift. It was subtle but unmistakable. He was no longer speaking for himself. Victoria's voice echoed through his words. Imani stepped back slightly. She needed space to think, even within the kitchen she loved. We can talk about it later, she said, hoping the conversation would end for the night. But later arrived sooner than she expected. The next afternoon, Victoria appeared at the door with a box of pastries and a look of manufactured tenderness. She walked through the house with an air of familiarity that unsettled Imani. They sat at the dining table while Victoria pretended to make polite conversation. Within minutes, the topic shifted. A strong marriage is built on a foundation of trust, Victoria said. A husband should feel he is the head of his household. When a wife keeps a deed under her own name, it creates instability. Imani clasped her hands in her lap. This house represents hard years of my life. I am not ready to change that. Victoria leaned back with a knowing smile. You will think differently once the family dinner comes this weekend. It will be a perfect time to celebrate a fresh start. The words were a promise disguised as courtesy. Imani understood that something had already been arranged. As Victoria left, Imani looked around the home she cherished and felt a tension she had never experienced within these walls. She walked to the living room window and watched the fading sunlight touch the porch she had painted with her own hands. The sense of safety she once felt had begun to shift into something more fragile. She wondered if Daniel sensed the same storm she felt building. She wondered if he even wanted to. The house felt heavier than usual when Daniel returned the following evening. Imani had been preparing a simple dinner, hoping for a quiet night after the tension of the past days. She listened to his footsteps as he walked down the hallway, and she sensed immediately that he carried the same unease she had noticed earlier in the week. When he entered the kitchen, he stopped behind her and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. She did not turn around until he spoke. I have been thinking about our conversation, he said, attempting a calm tone that did not match his restless fingers. Imani faced him and studied his expression. His eyes revealed conflict rather than conviction. She felt a tug of sadness because she remembered the days when he used to walk into a room with an ease that came from trust between them. What part have you been thinking about? She asked. Daniel leaned against the counter and intertwined his fingers as if trying to steady himself. I want us to feel unified. My parents believe that a shared home strengthens a marriage. They worry that keeping everything separate creates distance. I know my mother can be direct, but her intentions are not harmful. She just wants us to succeed. Imani inhaled slowly. She remembered how Victoria had examined every corner of the house as if she were appraising it for herself. She remembered the confident way she had spoken about a future that did not belong to her. Imani tried to keep her voice steady. This house has always been my anchor. I worked for it piece by piece, and I want to keep it in my own name because it represents my stability. I am not withholding anything from you. I simply want to feel safe. Daniel nodded, although the gesture felt forced. He rubbed the back of his neck as if searching for another argument. I understand why you feel that way. I do. But marriage is supposed to be a partnership, a real one. Parents worry when things seem uneven. Imani studied him in silence for a moment. It was not the request itself that troubled her, but the pressure behind it. She could almost hear Victoria urging him to speak. She wondered whether he understood the weight he placed on her shoulders by repeating his parents' expectations instead of honoring her boundary. Partnership does not require surrender, Imani said carefully. You have access to everything in this home. You share my life and my space. The deed does not change our marriage. It only protects what I built before you arrived. Daniel sighed and moved toward the dining table. He pulled out a chair and sat with his head lowered. I do not want this to become an argument. My mother thinks the family dinner will be the perfect time to settle everything. She wants everyone to see that we are solid. Imani stiffened. Settle everything. What does that mean? Daniel hesitated before responding. She believes that if you sign the papers while everyone is together, it will show unity. She says it will reassure the family. Imani felt her stomach tighten. She imagined Victoria orchestrating a celebration built on expectation rather than consent. The idea of being presented with documents in front of the entire Hayes family made her skin prickle. She felt not only cornered, but insulted that her mother-in-law believed she could be pressured by an audience. "Does your mother understand that this is my home?" she asked quietly. "Or does she think she can claim it simply because I married her son?" Daniel lifted his head quickly. "No, it is not like that. She worries about our long-term security. She thinks that if something ever happened to you, I would not have rights to the house. She thinks a wife should not carry the burden alone." Imani shook her head. "I already told you how important this is to me. The deed is not a burden. It is something I earned, something that helped me survive." Daniel stood again and reached for her hand. His voice softened. "I love you, Imani. I want us to move forward. This tension with my mother is hurting both of us. If you sign, things will settle. Everyone will see that we are united." Imani gently pulled her hand away. She did not want to reject him, but she could not ignore the ache growing in her chest. "If unity requires me to give up what keeps me grounded, then that is not unity. That is me disappearing so your mother can feel comfortable." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. His shoulders sagged under the weight of disappointment. "I wish you could try to understand where she is coming from." Imani felt a sharp sting behind her ribs. "And do you understand where I'm coming from?" Silence stretched between them. She waited for him to say something that might reassure her, but his hesitation answered for him. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked certainty. "I am trying." Imani turned away and placed the plates on the table. The clatter sounded louder than she intended. Dinner felt like a formality rather than a shared moment. They ate in quiet bites, each lost in thoughts that pulled them further apart. Later that night, when the house had settled into stillness, Imani sat alone in the living room. She looked around the space she had created, a home that once felt like a promise. Tonight it felt like a battleground she never expected to defend. She could not tell whether Daniel would stand beside her or quietly step aside and let others decide their future. As she rested her hand on the arm of the chair, she felt the familiar texture of the fabric she had chosen when she first moved in. She wondered how something so familiar could suddenly feel uncertain. She closed her eyes and tried to remind herself that she had fought for this home long before she knew Daniel. She would have to decide how far she was willing to go to protect it again. On the evening of the family dinner, Imani moved through the house with careful intention. She straightened the napkins, adjusted the candles on the table, and checked the oven, even though she knew the food was ready. Her movements were steady, yet her chest carried a tightness that refused to fade. She recognized the feeling as anticipation mixed with unease. It was the quiet suspicion that something awaited her, something orchestrated without her consent. Daniel entered the dining room wearing a smile that tried to appear natural. He carried a bottle of wine and set it on the table. His shoulders were stiff beneath his shirt, and his eyes avoided hers for a fraction too long. "They should be here soon," he said. "Everything looks great. You did an amazing job with the preparations." Imani nodded. She could not bring herself to respond with the warmth she once felt. Instead, she asked, "Did your mother say anything else about tonight?" Daniel hesitated. "She just wants everyone to enjoy themselves. She promised to keep things pleasant." Imani had difficulty believing that promise. She placed the last fork on the table and wiped her hands on a cloth, trying to prepare herself for whatever Victoria planned. The doorbell rang, slicing through the stillness of the house. Daniel hurried to answer it, and moments later, voices filled the entryway. Charles Hayes, Daniel's father, walked in first. He was a quiet man with gentle features, a person who rarely challenged his wife or children. He greeted Imani with a small smile. "Thank you for having us," he said politely. Emily Hayes, Daniel's older sister, followed him. Emily had always been kind to Imani, though her kindness often carried a tone of caution, as if she feared triggering their mother's displeasure. She handed Imani a bouquet of flowers and gave her a timid hug. "I hope tonight goes smoothly," she whispered. Imani appreciated the honest concern. She placed the flowers in a vase before turning to greet the next guests. Several cousins arrived, offering cheerful greetings and commenting on how lovely the house looked. Their words were sincere, yet they felt distant to Imani, as if spoken from a world untouched by the tensions she carried inside. Then the room shifted when Victoria Hayes stepped into the doorway. She carried herself with the composure of someone fully aware of her influence. Her outfit was elegant and crisp, and she wore the expression of a woman who had already decided the direction of the evening. By her side stood a man Imani had never met. "This is Mr. Miller," Daniel said quickly. "He is a friend of the family and works in real estate." Imani nodded politely, though unease bloomed within her. She offered her hand, and Mr. Miller shook it with a brief professional smile. His presence felt unexpected and out of place for a family dinner. As everyone settled into the dining room, Imani tried to focus on serving the meal. Conversation flowed around her, most of it light and harmless. Charles asked about the new recipes she had tried, and Emily commented on the decorations. For a short moment, Imani allowed herself to hope that tonight might pass without conflict. Her hope faded when she noticed Victoria watching her with a calm, deliberate intensity. It was the look of someone waiting for the right moment to strike. When dessert was placed on the table, Victoria tapped her spoon against her glass. The soft ringing cut through the conversation and pulled every gaze toward her. She smiled at the group, though the smile held no warmth. "I would like to say a few words," she announced. "This family cares deeply about unity. We want to see Daniel and Imani build a strong foundation for their future. With that in mind, we have prepared a small gesture that will help ensure their household remains protected and harmonious." Imani felt her pulse quicken. She looked at Daniel, searching for reassurance, but he stared at his plate as if he were afraid to lift his eyes. Mr. Miller opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. He placed it in front of Imani with an efficient motion. "This is a simple document," he said. "It adds Daniel's name to the deed and establishes joint ownership. Many couples choose to do this. It provides clarity and security for both parties." The room grew silent. The air felt thick, as if holding its breath. Imani stared at the folder, refusing to touch it. She realized that this moment had been planned in detail. The timing, the audience, the presence of a legal professional. The pressure was unmistakable. Daniel finally spoke. His voice trembled slightly. "This is just for us to be on the same page. It would mean a lot to the family." Imani lifted her gaze to him. "Did you know this was going to happen tonight?" Daniel hesitated. "I thought it might. My mother said it would be easier to talk with everyone here." Easier was not the word Imani would have chosen. She felt as though she had been placed on trial in her own home. Victoria folded her hands and leaned forward. "We all want to support you, dear. Signing this document shows commitment. It shows that you trust our family." Imani spoke clearly. "I will not sign something that concerns my home in front of an audience." Victoria's smile sharpened. "You are overreacting. This is a simple request. I cannot understand why you are resisting unless you have something to hide." Before Imani could respond, Victoria stood abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor, and her movement held an edge of fury. She approached Imani with stiff, angry steps. The slap came without warning. The sound echoed across the room, and the shock of it rippled through every person present. Imani's cheek burned with sudden heat. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Daniel stood in stunned silence. Charles looked away. Emily gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Imani raised her hand to her cheek, touching the sting. She kept her gaze fixed on Daniel, waiting for him to act, to speak, to defend her. He did nothing. For several seconds after the slap, silence gripped the room. It was not the kind of silence that softened tension. It was the kind that allowed humiliation to echo again and again inside the person who had suffered it. Imani felt the sting across her cheek spread into her jaw, yet the deeper pain settled in her chest. She kept her hand pressed lightly against her face while she looked directly at Daniel. She waited for him to speak. She waited for him to stand. She waited for any gesture that would show he cared more about her dignity than his mother's approval. None came. Victoria withdrew her hands slowly, breathing hard as if the slap had released something she had been holding inside for far too long. She turned to the table with a look that suggested she expected applause rather than shock. When she saw only wide eyes and trembling mouths, her smile flickered. "I had no choice," she said sharply. She embarrassed this family. Someone had to restore order. Imani lowered her hand. The heat in her cheek remained, but her eyes hardened with clarity. Not anger, not shame. Something steadier, something decisive. She stood, pushing her chair back with controlled force. Everyone watched her as she reached into the small drawer, built into the side of the television stand. She could feel their confusion as she retrieved a tiny remote. Her voice remained steady when she spoke. I am done pretending this is a misunderstanding. Before dinner began, I placed a discreet camera in the corner of this room. I did it because I sensed something was coming, and because I wanted the truth to have a witness that could not be silenced. Victoria scoffed loudly. Do not try to dramatize your refusal. There is nothing here to expose. Imani pressed a button on the remote. The television lit up instantly. Gasps rippled across the table as the recording began to play. The footage showed Victoria entering the house earlier that evening with Mr. Miller, their quiet exchange captured clearly. It showed Victoria whispering instructions to Daniel about how and when the deed should be signed. It showed her rolling her eyes at the mention of boundaries. It showed every word that proved her plan was never about unity. It was about conquest. The room felt smaller as the recording continued. Emily covered her mouth with both hands, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Charles shifted in his seat, ashamed to look at anyone. Mr. Miller attempted to maintain his neutral expression, although a faint tremor revealed his discomfort. The cousins stared at the screen in disbelief, whispering to one another. When the footage reached the moment where Victoria signaled for the documents to be placed in front of Imani, the atmosphere thickened. Then the final moment appeared. The slap. The sound replayed with brutal clarity. The entire table flinched as they heard it again. Imani paused the recording. That is what happened in my home, she said softly. I did not imagine disrespect. I did not exaggerate what this night was meant to be. This was a coordinated effort to pressure me into giving up the one place that has always protected me. And when manipulation failed, violence took its place. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words emerged. His eyes darted from the screen to his mother, then back to Imani. He looked like a man drowning without realizing he walked into the water himself. Imani, he finally whispered, I never wanted it to go this far. I thought it would be a simple conversation. I did not know she would react like that. Imani held his gaze. Your silence allowed it. You had every chance to stop this before it happened. You chose not to. Victoria slammed her hand on the table. You cannot speak to my son like that. He has always tried to help you. Emily stood suddenly. Her voice trembled but held unexpected strength. Mom, stop. You crossed a line tonight. You humiliated her. You humiliated all of us. And now the whole truth is right in front of you. Victoria stared at her daughter as if she had never seen her before. Emily's defiance seemed to shake her far more than the video had. Imani turned to Mr. Miller. You may take your documents and leave. This house will no longer host anything connected to this scheme. Mr. Miller collected the papers with rigid movements. He nodded to Imani. I apologize for the distress this has caused. His voice remained professional, but his eyes avoided Victoria's. As he stepped out, Imani walked to the front door and held it open. Her voice carried a calm steel. Anyone who supports what happened here tonight may follow him. I will not share space with people who believe violence and manipulation can force ownership over my life. Victoria rose to her feet with stiff dignity. You will regret speaking to your elders like this. No, Imani replied. I will regret staying quiet. Charles stood behind his wife, unsure whether he should defend her or distance himself. He mumbled a faint apology to Imani before guiding Victoria out of the house. Several cousins followed, avoiding eye contact, unsure whose side they belonged to now that the truth had been revealed. Emily lingered. She approached Imani with cautious steps. I am truly sorry. If you need a witness for anything, I will stand by you. Her voice cracked, but her sincerity was unmistakable. Thank you, Imani said, and for the first time that evening, her voice softened. When the door finally closed, the house fell into a deep quiet. Imani remained in the entryway, breathing slowly. The sting of the slap was still present, but the weight on her shoulders felt lighter. Her home, for the first time that night, felt like hers again. Daniel remained seated at the table, looking lost in a way Imani had never seen. He tried to speak, but the words dissolved on his tongue. Imani did not join him. She needed distance. She needed clarity. She walked to the living room and allowed herself a long, steady breath. Tonight had changed something fundamental between them, something she did not know if she could recover. The house remained silent long after the last guest had left. Imani stood in the dimly lit living room with her arms wrapped lightly around herself, as if holding together the pieces of a moment she had not yet fully processed. The weight of the evening pressed on her chest, and she felt the echo of the slap each time she inhaled. Daniel remained in the dining room, unmoving, as if he were waiting for the silence to tell him what to do next. She turned away from the table and headed toward the stairs. Her footsteps were slow, not from doubt, but from the exhaustion of carrying too many emotions at once. When she reached the bedroom, she closed the door behind her and leaned against it. The faint imprint on her cheek was still visible in the mirror, and she studied it with quiet disbelief. She traced the edge of the redness gently, noting how her skin pulsed with soreness even though her expression remained steady. Her phone vibrated on the bedside table. It was her mother, Denise Walker. Denise lived only a short drive away and had always been Imani's anchor. She was a woman who spoke with a calm authority that came from surviving her own storms. Denise had worked tirelessly to raise Imani alone after years of instability. Her guidance shaped Imani into the woman she became, resilient, thoughtful, and unwilling to let fear dictate her decisions. Imani answered the call with a soft greeting. Denise immediately sensed the strain in her daughter's voice. "What happened tonight?" Denise asked gently. Imani sat on the edge of the bed. "It was worse than I imagined. Victoria brought a lawyer to the dinner. She tried to force me to sign the deed over in front of everyone. When I refused, she slapped me. I recorded everything and showed it to them. They all saw what she did." There was a quiet pause as Denise absorbed each word. "And Daniel," she asked, "what did he do when it happened?" Imani swallowed. The answer felt heavier than the slap itself. "Nothing." He stood there and said nothing. The silence on the other end carried a depth that made Imani's chest tighten. When Denise finally spoke, her voice was steady. "You were assaulted in your own home, and the man who vowed to protect you chose to freeze. You must decide what that means for you. But before you make any decisions, you need to come here. You need rest. You need clarity." Imani closed her eyes. She knew her mother was right. She needed distance not only from Victoria's hostility, but also from Daniel's silence. She ended the call and began packing a few essentials into a small overnight bag. The act of placing each item inside felt strangely symbolic. She was gathering the pieces of her life, preparing to step away from a space that had been both sanctuary and battleground. As she zipped the bag, she heard footsteps in the hall. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his expression pale and worn. He looked at the suitcase, then at her face. "Imani," he said in a small voice. "Are you leaving?" "I am going to my mother's," she replied. "I need time to think." Daniel stepped into the room. His hands hung uselessly at his sides. "I know tonight was terrible. I never expected my mother to react that way. I did not know what to do." Imani lifted the bag from the bed and faced him fully. "There were many things you could have done. You could have spoken up. You could have taken my side. You could have told her to stop. You could have shown me that my dignity mattered more than her approval." Daniel shook his head. "It all happened so fast. I was in shock." "Then why was she the only one who found her voice?" Imani asked softly. "Why was your silence louder than anything she said?" Daniel had no answer. His eyes glistened, not with anger, but with the fear of losing something he thought he still controlled. "Please do not go," he whispered. "We can fix this." Imani felt her heart ache, but not with hope. It ached with the understanding that something had cracked in a way it could not easily mend. "I am not leaving to punish you. I am leaving to protect myself." She walked past him and down the stairs. With each step, she felt the tight coil in her chest loosen. When she opened the front door, the cool night air enveloped her. She breathed deeply, grateful for the quiet outside. She placed her suitcase in the car, and as she settled into the driver's seat, she looked back at the house. The porch light illuminated the doorway, where she had once welcomed Daniel with love and trust. Tonight, that same doorway looked unfamiliar, as if it no longer belonged to the life she had imagined. Imani drove through the quiet streets until she reached her mother's home. The small house was warm and inviting. Denise opened the door before Imani even knocked. She pulled her daughter into a strong embrace. "I am here," Denise murmured. "You are safe now." Imani felt her body relax in a way it had not all night. She stepped inside, leaving behind the echoes of the evening. Over the next hour, she sat with her mother in the living room and explained everything. Denise listened, her face solemn. When Imani finished, Denise touched her hand. You deserve a partner who stands with you, not someone who waits for permission to do what is right. Imani nodded. A quiet certainty settled inside her. She did not know yet what decision she would make, but she knew she could no longer pretend that Daniel's silence was a momentary lapse. It was a reflection of a deeper truth she could no longer ignore. When she finally lay down to sleep in her childhood bedroom, she stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of the night slowly lift. For the first time since the dinner began, she breathed without pain. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming herself. Morning light slipped gently through the curtains of Denise Walker's living room. The quiet inside the house felt different from the quiet inside Imani's home. This quiet carried warmth rather than tension. It invited her to breathe rather than brace herself. She sat on the couch with her knees drawn close, a cup of warm tea cradled between her hands. Denise moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, giving her daughter space but remaining close enough to reach whenever she was needed. Imani heard the faint hum of a car engine outside. She did not move at first. She listened to the sound of a door shutting and slow footsteps approaching the front porch. Denise appeared in the doorway of the living room and looked toward her daughter with calm understanding. He is here, Denise said quietly. Imani set her tea down and straightened her posture. She felt a soft tremor beneath her ribs, not of fear, but of readiness. There was no surprise in Daniel's arrival. The only question was what he believed he could mend after what had shattered the night before. A knock echoed through the house. Denise opened the door with steady composure. Daniel stood outside with tired eyes and a wrinkled shirt, as though he had not slept. He glanced past Denise and saw Imani on the couch. His expression broke into a plea that he tried to soften into a hopeful smile. "May I come in?" he asked. Denise stepped aside but did not leave the doorway fully. "You may, as long as you speak with respect. My daughter needs truth more than apologies." Daniel nodded and walked inside. Imani watched him with a guarded calm that surprised even herself. The man she once trusted seemed smaller now, as if the weight of the previous night had reshaped him. He approached her slowly. "Imani," he said, "I am so sorry. I know those words are not enough, but I need you to hear them." Imani gestured for him to sit in the chair across from her. Keeping distance felt necessary, not out of resentment, but out of clarity. Daniel lowered himself into the seat and clasped his hands together. "I spent the entire night replaying everything. I should have stepped between you and my mother. I should have defended you. I should have stopped everything before it even began." His voice cracked at the edges. "I froze. I let everyone down, especially you." Imani watched him, observing every shift in his expression. There was sincerity in his tone, yet she felt a barrier that apology alone could not cross. "Why did you freeze?" she asked. "What stopped you from protecting me in that moment?" Daniel looked down at his hands. "I have spent my whole life trying to earn my mother's approval. When she becomes upset, it feels like the air disappears. I never learned how to stand up to her. I did not expect her to hurt you. When she did, I felt trapped between two instincts. Protect you or avoid provoking her. I chose the wrong one." Imani listened carefully. She believed he meant what he said, but she also understood that meaning something did not undo the consequences. "I did not need you to fight her," she replied gently. "I needed you to choose me. Even one word, even one step. Silence does not protect peace. It only protects the person who caused the harm." Daniel lifted his eyes. "I know. I see that now. I want to make this right." Denise took a seat on the armchair near them. Her presence remained firm but compassionate. "Making things right requires more than regret," she said. "My daughter cannot build a life with someone who stands aside when she is attacked. Marriage demands courage, not perfection, courage." Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand. That is why I am here. I want another chance to show that I can be the partner she deserves." Imani felt a tug of sadness as she looked at him. It was not the sadness of losing someone. It was the sadness of recognizing a truth she had tried for too long to ignore. "Daniel," she said softly, "I do not doubt that you want to change. But wanting is not enough. Last night revealed something we have been avoiding. You are afraid of your mother's anger. I cannot live in a marriage where her voice carries more weight than mine. Daniel leaned forward as if closing the distance might change her mind. I can go to therapy. I can create boundaries. I can talk to her. I can do whatever it takes. Imani shook her head. Boundaries are not formed overnight. Courage is not a promise. It is action. And last night, when I needed action most, I saw what your instinct chose. That moment was honest in a way neither of us can ignore. A tear slipped from the corner of Daniel's eye. He brushed it quickly and stood up. Are you telling me this is over? Imani rose slowly. She stepped closer, not to comfort him, but to speak with clarity. I am telling you that I deserve a life with peace, stability, and respect. I deserve a partner who sees me as equal even when it is difficult. You deserve a chance to grow without being weighed down by guilt. We are pulling each other in opposite directions, and it is time we let go. Daniel covered his face with both hands. His shoulders shook. I never wanted to lose you. I did not want this either, she replied gently, but I cannot lose myself to keep you. Denise stood and placed a hand on Imani's back. Daniel looked at both women, realizing the decision was not just made, it was understood. I will gather my things from the house, he said quietly. Let me know when you feel comfortable returning. I will not be there. Imani nodded. It was the first request from him that felt respectful. Daniel walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned once more. I hope you find the peace you deserve. Imani held his gaze. I hope you find the strength you have always needed. When the door closed, Denise embraced her daughter. Imani leaned into the comfort without collapsing. She felt steady. Painful, yes, but steady. The fear that once clouded her vision had cleared, leaving behind a path she could finally see. She knew where she was going, and it was forward.